Yeah, it sounds better than this morning. No audio. Well, nobody needs to hear what I gotta say anyway. This is gonna be a shit show. Okay, we're a go, except they're not gonna hear me. So the talk is called No Trade Secrets because, well, we want everything to be open, right? And in the energy and permaculture world, we kind of have always done things that way. So why, when we use software, would it be any different, right? I'm an electrician and a homesteader type guy by trade, so probably the stupidest person at this conference, but that's okay. I have fun and I'm funny, so let's go. Our arch nerd is my first quote. Eric Raymond said, "The pace of change was so fast that 50 different technical cultures grew and died as rapidly as mayflies, never achieving quite the stability necessary to develop a communal tradition of jargon, folklore, and mythic history," which, as I said before, we already have in farming, permaculture, and regenerative agriculture. And now I feel like we have in open source and FOSS culture as well. One I like, and there he is, Masanobu Fukuoka, who was a very smart scientist in Japan, who started something called Do Nothing Farming, said, "The ultimate goal of farming is not the growing of crops, but the cultivation and perfection of human beings." It's a good sentiment. I don't know if it's true or not, but we'll see. And then finally, David Holmgren, who is pretty much the inventor of the principles or systematizer of the principles of permaculture, said that insofar as permaculture is an effective response to the limitations on use of energy and natural resources, it will move from its current status as alternative response to environmental crisis to the social and economic mainstream of the post-industrial era. And it doesn't really matter what you call it. It's just the stuff that works. So, theory and principles. The current state of affairs is kind of a shit show. If anybody follows the right to repair movement or issues with Monsanto, bioengineering, and farm data in general, you'll know that farmers don't own anything. Pretty much all that they own on their property is their waste stream. Their produce, their inputs, their machinery, everything is on loan and is completely closed and invisible to them. They can't really compete on a farm level, and so while there's not really a huge open movement at that scale. There are, but we're not really going to talk about that. In this talk, we're going to be talking more about small scale, permanent, and homestead level solutions, which you guys can do and host yourselves, so that your stuff isn't locked away like the big guys have to pretty much live under. It's a trap. Don't go into farming as a profession, by the way. Yeah, I was it for 10 years. So right here we see the kind of the core of permanent agriculture or permaculture. The design methodology that was set forth by David Holmgren and Bill Mollison, based on a book that came out over 100 years ago called Farmers of 40 Centuries, or Permanent Agriculture in China, Korea, and Japan. F.H. King was the head of the U.S. Department of Agriculture back before World War I. He died right before World War I, actually before the book was published. But he was able to see for almost 30 years of his life how traditional cultures were able to, for 40 centuries, 4,000 years, terrace, collect water, save seeds, share seeds, pass on traditional knowledge over and over again without any detriment to their soil. And unfortunately, about 30 years after the book was published, most of Southeast Asia and South China and Korea was completely decimated by post-war industrial agriculture. But that's another story. So alongside that, we have the permaculture movement that essentially sets a property, whether it's it's scale invariant, whether it's your household or a 1,500 acre farm. You set things up in terms of usage zones, and these you can really define them the way you want, and you can have 3, you can have 5, you can have 10. It really is up to you to decide how you want to organize and structure your property in terms of how often you use it. So obviously, zone 1 will be things that you use every day. Zone 2 will be every other day, kind of arbitrary. 3, twice a week. 4, every week. And then we have every month, and then you could say every year, every 5 years. If you're dealing with silvicultural or agroforestry where you're timbering, you're not going to be, like I said, if you've got 2,000 acres of forest, you're not going to be out there all the time, even though you'd like to be. But for this reason, observe and interact is the prime principle of permaculture. And it sounds obvious, but that's kind of the point of permaculture. We don't really observe and we don't interact with the things that matter. We observe our phones and we live in controlled environments. We, for instance, have just garbage hedgerows and mulch and useless trees that are non-natives, that are full of pests and diseases, instead of creating native production trees. We wear shoes. It's kind of a joke, but and I think a lot of times in this sector, whether we're working with software or hardware, we're not really observing why we're doing it. We're just doing it because we're told to, because there's a need for it within our niche and not necessarily in a large, big picture. And we just interact with and observe useless crap that does nothing but complicate our lives. So I think what we need to do is remind ourselves to actually observe and interact with the things that matter. Permaculture is about taking the time to drill the obvious and traditional into your brain on a daily basis. Heuristics. So in no particular order, I'm going to break down the permaculture design principles in a way that is logical. So we design from pattern to detail in order to fill our dedicated zones and their margins, so the other dimensions of our zones, with assets to obtain a yield. That's really all we are looking to do, is to obtain a yield. So while we do this, we creatively use and respond to change as we observe and interact, as said before, with said assets. We need to catch and store energy, key to this talk, with every inch of our domain. With this abundant yield, which energy is a yield, we need to rigorously attempt to produce no waste, to collect our waste streams and bring them back onto the property, to upcycle, if you will, like we do with our beloved ThinkPads. Increasing yield requires that we apply self-regulation and accept feedback, key, both from our natural systems and our human resources, whatever they may be, which is also going to apply importantly in the next few slides. As our systems become more complex, we need to integrate rather than segregate, bring things together. These resource and feedback systems, while at the same time valuing diversity of inputs, thought systems, people groups, etc., and using small and slow solutions throughout. Kind of think of Eric Raymond's Bazaar. And yes, obviously we need to use renewable resources and services so that these yields continue to serve our families, our communities, our nation, and our planet. So to use edges and value margins is the 12th principle. I would consider it to be, now after 30 years of these principles being around, essentially what permaculture excels at versus any other system. It's utilizing space and kind of being able to organize our property and our space into these zones so that we can properly locate these spaces that we might not necessarily be aware of, and do things, for example, like trellising berries or edible flower vines like passiflora or nasturtium or something outside of your house, or in a green room on a trellis, or outside on tree trunks, for example. You can do that. Poison ivy grows up, so why can't you grow vining plants. Multiple yielding grafts on individual trees, so you can do that. Or self-hosting headless services on low-spec would-be e-waste devices like old laptops or whatnot in your house. There's a margin. Like I said before, replacing non-yielding ornamental hedges with yielding perennials, bulb flowers, tubers, just annual vegetables in general. Or, for example, just taking the principle and applying it to something else, applying self-regulation and accepting internal feedback, sometimes during the day, which what we call contemplation meditation, or doing this around, like I do, your air cleaning house plants that are hanging from the ceilings directly above all your other plants to create efficient watering. You just water the top layer, it comes down and waters the bottom layer, and it's great. Ferns above monstera and corners with that light pattern, that works pretty well, just as an example. But here we I feel like there's all sorts of things I could talk about in permaculture. We can go through those more in the Sunday Birds of a Feather. But I want to talk really quickly about biointensive and regenerative agriculture, which is kind of within the permacultural movement. Like I said, it doesn't matter what it's called. It's all kind of the stuff that works. But biointensive and regenerative agriculture uses soil conservation and fertilization in a heavily rotated minimal till planting schedule to keep things going at a really hard pace so that we can build soil quickly. So you increase organic matter through the use of cover cropping and companion planting. So companion planting being plants that use different nutrient spectrums of the soil, and then cover cropping to reduce erosion. And with the minimal till, allowing the cover cropping to actually mature and maintain bioavailable carbon in the soil, which creates the soil conservation and hence the biointensive. So agroforestry and silvicultural practices also provide a nexus for margin use by mimicking natural forest systems. Think over and understory, where you can grow mushrooms, tree growing plants, et cetera, around your property, or however, if you're blessed with a lot of woods, you can do that in the woods, and you can actually bring different fertilization systems from the forest by doing like rice cultures with mycorrhizal inoculations for one example. And then alongside this, composting and mulching with your dead matter increases the water retention. Think permacultural slow it, sink it, spread it. And this allows for more nutrient uptake, like I said, bioavailable carbon, free-base carbon, and which requires, if you have a better soil with more mycorrhizal connections, you need less irrigation. And then finally, use open pollinated native hedges as wind and sun barriers, and they work hand in hand with intercropped yielding plants. So again, utilizing your margins and really trying to get as much yield and production and also other purposes out of single plants in a very small area, and it eventually looks like this. That's kind of what we're going for here. You can see behind them we've got the corn and the squash, and you'll see down there beans, so you've got the three sisters, and then down here you've got basil intercropped with tomatoes with a border of with lacinato kale, and then over here we've got what looks like to be sunflower stalks. This is these are the trellised squash that are around the corn. And the beans can grow up the corn as well. This is the classic plant guild, the Three Sisters. And then this right here acts as an insect and pest repellent, other than aphids, but those can be kept in control with other things like different types of manganese sprays and whatnot. But that's for a whole other talk. So like I said before, these techniques just are, they're another facet of the wide world of what I like to call the stuff. I usually use a different word that obviously works. Permaculture aims to direct energy flow on a property back into itself, while regenerative ag requires, like I said, a large amount of external resources to begin with, because you're trying to regenerate your soil. You can't do that if there's nothing in the soil to begin with. But honestly, with most projects, that's how it ends up being. Regardless, you're going to have to combine them. But by utilizing strict record keeping and plugging what we discover back into both the citizen and professional scientist networks, we can see where energy is being restricted and or wasted. We try to get more granular with things and document what we're doing. This goes for how we power our domiciles and our equipment as well. So let's get into how open source software and the communities around it can aid in this quest. Praxis and tech. So this right here is the organization that is kind of umbrellas this movement as a whole. It started about 16 years ago now, and kind of started with a broad definition of what a tool is. Because it really started with tractor modification and things of that nature. So a lot of welding, a lot of PVC irrigation, which I'll show you in a second. But it also allows no tech, low tech, and high tech. It doesn't really matter. It can be a method, a resource, or a system. It can be hardware, software, or an electronic device, a sensor. But it was founded by actually a group. They're called the Greenhorns. It's a network of farmers, scientists, and whatnot up in New England. And one of the big reasons why I am focusing on this and this subject for this talk today and this weekend is because A, it's super cool, but B, they got an 11th hour grant just this year. And I've been talking to the new Greenhorn Fellow for FarmHack and the Reboot to get more people on board with revitalizing this project that kind of fell off since basically COVID. But yeah, they're trying to team up with non-farmers who have relevant skill sets and build new relationships in manufacturing capacity in local economies. And just to show you real quick. So the cool thing about it is, right off the bat, you can see what they're doing. They're hacking physical space, and that's how it started off. They've got a tool library here, which has a lot of stuff, has been around for a while. Some really simple stuff, just on-off control, automated irrigation controllers, using like PEX, and this is one that was added not too long ago. But we've got Node-RED. This is Farmer Ted. He's been around in the movement for a long time, but we've got sensor data in FarmOS, which is what I'm about to go over, utilizing a few other open source. Node-RED is by Google, but just to show you, but we've got hoop chicken trailers. We have CAD drawings for things that you can build. Tons of them, bicycle-powered fanning mill, and we even have, cedar roller generator. This is a file to be 3D printable and a few different scales to go with Jang cedars. I don't know how many of you are familiar with handheld cedars, but Jang is pretty much the industry standard you can get from Johnny's Tools and whatnot. And then this one is really cool too, that kind of replaced the FarmOS aggregator module, not the listener module. And this is a sensor data collector that this is for physical pipes. I know people, if you're on your command line, you might think of it differently for sensor data, but no, this is actual pipes. And then they have, I think, they have automation through Arduino, but I'll get into that later as well. But that's just an example of the overall what FarmHack does. FarmOS is kind of the flagship software that came out of this movement. Mike Stenta, he's a farmer and a glassworker up in Connecticut, who developed this Drupal-based web app. It started out a little differently, but over the past few years, it's evolved into what it is now. But it is a free and open web application aimed mostly at organizing and recording a property's resources that can then be shared with the community at large. It's, like I said, it's completely open, so you can go to GitHub, build it. You can use Docker to build it on your own system, or which, we've run into some problems with that. I'm not really sure what's going on, but the easy way to do it is to just host it with Farmier Cloud Service, which is what he provides as a service to make some money for his. It's really reasonable. It's $75 a year. I went over that yet, but yeah, you can self-host it, and Drupal and PharmOS have large official documentation and then great community support on their forums and discourse. So FYI. But so this is a microservice that was made by a contributor to the project, but the aggregator basically allows, because you're self-hosting it a lot more of the bigger users are self-hosting it. It provides a graphical user interface for registering PharmOS instances with the aggregator, and then a REST API so that people can interact with other PharmOS instances, and it can be one-to-one, or it can be one-to-multiple. It really just depends on how the administrators choose to move forward with it. Right there, yeah, I just touched on that. So, sorry, I'm going through these too fast. I've got a lot of ground to cover, and I'm trying not to. But here's a demo of this real quick. Let me, yeah. So luckily, if you want to go try this software out, you can spin up a demo by going to the PharmOS website and just spin it up immediately. And you can label it whatever you want, and you can go through, and I'll just really quick, again, this is going to be something that we can go through more at the Sunday BOF because it takes some time, but real quickly, so what you do in PharmOS is you have your property. So you can if you have, say, if you've got a field of sheep on 10 acres, 2 miles down the road, you've got your own house and the land around that, and then say you've got corn and soy on 1,000 acres that you're renting from some giant corporation somewhere down. You can have assets, land assets, which are essentially Drupal modules. Not essentially, they are Drupal modules that you can monitor and record keep and log independently, or you can essentially, what I did here, I've got where we are at, spun this up, and I've made a land asset right here. What's cool right here is you can actually, one second, you can put in your NRCS soil survey overlay on where you're at, so you can see what you're dealing with, and you can record that. And then, if you look at this, the second aspect of this is where you essentially can automate your human resources via email with your calendar. So you've got a visual calendar here. Probably, how many of you have worked on a farm, a small farm? So you're familiar with like the whiteboard. Basically, you go into the cleaning station or the chicken slaughter or whatever, wherever, and there's a whiteboard, and it's got all the tasks, and people forget about it. And the tools don't go back to where they're supposed to go, and it's. I get it. That's farms aren't very high tech, but this is generally, I think, the most utilized aspect of PharmOS, where you have your locations. So here, right here, I've labeled this as a space set for demolition. So we're gonna jackhammer all this up, and we're gonna see what we can do with the soil underneath. It's called self-destruction. Sorry. I'm clicking on the wrong things. There's a lot going through my head right now. What you can do right now, you just start with quick forms and go right here to movement. So with the movement, you use this form to record the movement of assets to a new location. Oh no, that's not what I want. Sorry, planting. And we're going to do. It doesn't really matter what the season. We'll just say because it's summer. It's summer. We're going to do the crop variety. We're going to say it's mulberry and fig. Actually, I should probably name that something that's more searchable. And then if it's a mix, we'll say there's 2 crops. This is going to be a transplanting technically, not a seeding, because what we're going to be doing is going to, I guarantee you that around this parking lot there are plenty of mulberry trees that we could go. We'll take hardwood cuttings for them, little hardwood cuttings, dip them into some hormone and create big beds of it. Let's do this. Let's do that. Just so that we know, just so that they're connected, even though one's mulberry and one's fig, that's going to be mulberry too. You set your date, you set your location. So I've got demolished beds already to be auto-populated, so that's one. If I can have 4 demolished beds, and so if I do that, you'll have demolished beds 1, demolished beds 2. You understand? And then the quantity, we'll just say there's 4 flat, which is 4 flats. So we could just say 24 for a flat. So we're looking at 96 units. And then the weight, I'm just, this is count. And then the notes, you can put in essentially what the task is. So it's going to be demolished. We'll assume that the asphalt has already been removed. Asphalt replaced with mulberry cuttings, whatever. And then you can either have it as an administrator. You can check it as completed. That you don't really have to worry about that. But right there, and then so you submit that. Oh, come on. Oh, geez. Okay, well, you get damn it. Shit. The demos, it's not, oh, god damn it. Okay, sweet. It wouldn't be self if things were constantly breaking. But anyways, that's a quick rundown of that, but the last aspect of this that we want to look at, asset created, so it worked, okay. But yeah, so we've got our human resources right here, and so you can add people. Is my internet just being really slow? It shouldn't be, I'm hardwired, I'm on Ethernet. Okay, so you put in their email address, you create a username for them, and a password. So you've got, as an administrator, you have full control of your dashboard and your peoples. You give them a role, so you just say worker, sign language, the New York, and then when you create the account, I haven't put this in, but I'll just say, the Archmage, blah, blah. That's weak, I know. And the email address, I'll just put this in, my email. Create the new account. Oh, come on. Oh, do I have to? Oh. So, I've got the new user for the Archmage. No email has been set, but when the tasks are set to autocomplete, and for the date, which I actually didn't set, I just realized, then people will get the email. They'll get them right into their inbox that morning, and they have their tasks. You don't even have to talk to them. And you can do that so imagine that at 4 different locations with 10 workers, with 32 different crops that you have to plant, also irrigation, a sensor collection where you have to go out and actually pull your logs manually because it's too far away and it's not connected to any of your nodes that you actually have connected to your server. Like, there's all sorts of things, because if any of you have worked on a farm, you know that it is constant. So there has to be something that just goes. And this project actually had a significant amount of funding and marketing put into it. About 4 years back by Red Hat, and it was really great to see them do that. Unfortunately, kind of COVID put the greenhorns on hiatus and stymied that, but it's not a big deal because we're doing it again. Oh lordy, what happened there? Okay, well, screw it. In terms of monitoring systems and sensors for energy, the 2 projects that I wanted to focus on, one, which I think is the superior project, but it's in Wales, UK, is Open Energy Monitor, OEM. It's a system completely open, both in software and hardware, that has the capability to monitor electrical energy use, generation, temperature, and humidity. So with your heat pumps, your solar, your air conditioning, your mains, your central service panel. You can also integrate with M-bus and Modbus heat meters, which are standard heat meters, and other electricity meters that obviously aren't open for heat pump monitoring. You've got a 6-channel electricity monitor with integrated Raspberry Pi, but I mean that's just what their system is built on, the Emon Pi 2, which is this system right here. Pretty standard energy, like you can get this stuff, you can get closed systems from China or whatever on Amazon. I wouldn't plug that into my central electrical panel, but to each their own. But it supports single and 3-phase monitoring, and then wired and temperature sensing and pulse counting, which is how it takes its measurements. But it provides a serious amount of information and documentation and educational resources on their website, OEM. And it can be used as a base station for further sensor nodes, which I think this one, this one is, where we go. This one is 6 for high power, and then the data is logged and visualized with Emon CMS, which can integrate with Home Assistant, and is an all-in-one solution that they've created that's completely open on GitHub. You can do whatever you want with it, and I think it's probably a better solution than not necessarily, but then like using another database service and then using Grafana or something to visualize it. This seems a little bit more streamlined and built to be integrated specifically with this hardware. They do it really well in Europe and the UK. They've got a great shop, and they've partnered with Open EVSE, which is electric vehicle charging units, actual units, chargers that are open source versus the Ford or Tesla or whatever, which I install multiples a week, and they drive me crazy. That was designed for the European market, but the OEVSE is globally designed, so those can interact with the technology the tech I'm about to show you. But Emon Lib is the IDE development library that you can use for Arduino to mess with it yourself. Everything is under your control. Open Energy Monitor and IoT Watt, which is US-based and US-built, which is also based on Raspberry Pi, is, like I said, they're both systems that can integrate with Home Assistant. IoT has been integrated with it longer than OEM, and they have their own ways of doing it. Not necessarily the most straightforward thing, but we can go over that on Sunday if you're interested. But like I said, this can configure to upload their data to InfluxDB and use Grafana, or it can use Emon CSM, which I just showed you, or Emon CMS, which is built for this sort of thing. But I can just leave this here if you want to write any of that down. But that's kind of the technical information of how it actually works. It's not as complicated as it seems. Essentially, you've just got a pulse sensor that goes around your line, which your hot coming your line, which is coming from your circuit breaker, and then you have a transformer that's plugged into a receptacle, and it just takes your voltage pulse from your main AC breaker and translates it into a voltage that your Raspberry Pi can understand. And then the browser-based, so it's got a little modem in there. It knows how to interpret the signals to produce a highly accurate measure of the power being used at any moment, and then send it right to your database and get it visualized that you can again see in your Home Assistant on your, like here they've got it on an iPad, but there's all sorts of devices that you can put that on if you're familiar with Home Assistant. And then for these things, we have another conference, kind of like SELF, but it's GOAT, the Gathering for Open Agricultural Technology, and we didn't have one last year. 2022 was, but being part of the whole farm hack movement, it has gotten the funding from the 11th Hour Project, and it's got a bunch of human resources behind it. So the goals for this year are to just coordinate existing development. So people at places like SELF or OLF or the one in the Northeast or anywhere else that are working on open ag software they want to bring them all together under GOAT and to invite new people who are, exactly what it sounds like. And then aligning technology and actual users, so kind of what we're doing here, where people aren't necessarily familiar with what I'm talking about. I mean, how many people here had heard of any of this before? Okay. So yeah, and that's not surprising. I've been I was paying more attention to FarmOS back in like 2015, 2016 when I was managing an actual farm, but it kind of, again, fell off. But there are other people who are showing more interest in this project as they kind of put more efforts into getting it out there. The last one's actually not that important. But yeah, creating a GOAT 24 roadmap. So just obviously organizing the conference right now. It looks like it's going to be happening in California. But anyway, I leave it with this as a conclusion. The technologies that produce our food and the data about our food system should be public and enable control by the farms and farmers that produce it. Together, we can collectively address the problems which prevent the creation of advanced, high-quality open technology and its adoption. That's GOAT Tech, and I believe all of FOSS's and our community's mission, whether it's food or our open technology. We all want the same thing. So resources, the FarmOS community, Mike, he hosts a monthly call via Jitsi that anybody can go and attend and get information on the software, raise issues that they might have submitted in GitHub, feature requests, things of that nature. Just talk about farming and just geek out on that stuff because farmers are hackers of the land. Everything is to do your best, hack the rest. They're held on the second Wednesday of the month at 2 p.m. Eastern U.S. time. If you're on Discourse, FarmOS, FarmHack, and GOAT have big Discourse communities where you can go and post your own topics or get involved with them. You can be on there forever. If you have any questions, with using any of this technology, integration, finding little niche patches here and there to get things to work together because everybody's land, everybody's tech is different. That's where you go. And then as far as this weekend goes, I'll be around. My buddy Ken here, who's a burgeoning permaculturist and farmer, Aaron Gardner here in Charlotte, who's a big Fukuoka guy. We're going to be hosting a Birds of a Feather at 10 over there, where FOSS and permaculture converge. So let's dig deeper, and we can all try to spin up some FarmOS instances, try to get those talking to each other, share planting and foraging tips, and see if we can't get people to commit to the greater farm hack community in this year and going forward. So yeah, I think that's gonna do it. Yeah, that's the end of the slideshow. I'm gonna put it back to this picture because I like it. But it seems like we have a little bit of time left. 10 minutes. Does anybody have any questions about all that mumbo jumbo?
My question is, could you review what are the three sisters pictured there?
Oh, the three sisters. Well, it's basically, so you've got corn, and then you have a squash or a pumpkin or anything of that nature. Generally like just like a duck-headed squash, and then you have beans, fava, green, poke, any sort of bean that you'd like. So the idea is that it's a guild, and so corn is a grass, and so it's going to be feeding on anything in the soil structure that is more that allows for bioavailable carbon in like a bacterial type of soil. Everything else is going to be feeding on the nitrogen that's available in the soil that this guy is not taking up because they have pretty huge fruiting bodies, and the corn stalks allow space or a trellis for, like I was saying, that's an unused margin, right? Like this is how permaculture and regenerative ag thinks of margins. If you look at a cornfield, you don't say, "Man, look at all the space between all those corn stalks. I can use that." Who thinks that, right? Well, traditional peoples, they're like, "Whoa, there's space there. Oh, I'm growing rice. I'm growing wet paddied rice," which is again, a terrace. The terraced rice fields, that is essentially a bermed piece of land, a swale, as you will, that collects water, keeps it there, and they found another grass, a rice, to grow in that, and then they're like, "Oh, look at all this water. What can we plant in the water?" Well, a lot of times they raise things like, especially in Vietnam, as sort of like a crayfish. I forget exactly what the name of it is, but it's a crayfish or little type of like guppy minnows that they use as a dish. So there's a margin where they're producing two yields in one. Same concept here. So the third aspect of this, the third sister is the big leaves that you see on the squash is the cover crop. So understory, like shielding crop. It's not technically a cover crop, but it does help to shade out the soil and retain the water, and kind of regulate this understory, which is, again, like I was saying, in terms of agroforestry and silviculture, we have this concept of this is kind of a scale invariant model of how a forest works. Just because we're looking at this, imagine these as being tall conifers with an understory of smaller, ash, cherry, whatnot, and then with the very bottom understory of ferns and fiddlehead ferns and leeks or wild leeks, ramps, and then even down you've got saprophytes like mushrooms, et cetera, et cetera. There's these layer upon layer upon layer, margin within margin within margin, and it's pretty much the opposite of how industrial culture operates. They're not really thinking in those terms. So, and the reason they're called the Three Sisters, it comes from northeastern indigenous peoples' lore. We got this technique from members of the Iroquois Confederacy, I guess. Northeastern. So, whatever that is, I'm not huge on what tribes do what, but it's common knowledge. They've found evidence of this all the way in Illinois, down here in California. It's pretty standard, even in Central America, widely used.
So as far as for someone who hasn't done much with any sort of gardening at home, what is a good intro project for someone to do that kind of combines FOSS and gardening, or potentially even like chickens or something like that? What's like a good intro?
Yeah, I would say the one that seems to be the best starter is just building a raised bed, doing an intercropped system of carrots, basil, and tomatoes. That's a good guild. And then it's just setting up an irrigation monitor. So so you can get all sorts. I think it's an E885C. You can get them on Amazon. It looks like a little stick, and you can put them at different areas in your soil, and then they just plug in it looks just like a 3.5 millimeter jack, and you put it into there are a few different products you can get. All based on Raspberry Pis or other single board computers, and then you can have with either with FarmOS or with just whatever database tool you have on your computer. You can literally just SSH into your little monitor right there, and it just is logs. They just log it all day, every day at whatever interval that you want to set it at. You can go on YouTube. There are tons of different videos on how to do it, different methods. That's generally how they do it, but the specifics and the actual tools that you use is going to be up to you. I mean, because it's such the first DIY that people want to do, there's so many products, and I mean, honestly, a lot of like hucksters out there, but just get into that, and the sky's the limit, or the ground's the limit. So.
Hey, so I had a question kind of building off of his. It kind of sounds like you're marrying these two complicated topics together. And I think a lot of people in this room are probably way more familiar with the tech side of it.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, do you have any books on permaculture? Because I feel like someone like me that's interested in this kind of thing, it would be good to dive into that, and then the ideas would just kind of come, because I already know how to do, coding and working with microcontrollers and all that. So I guess like top 3 permaculture books.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily call them permaculture books. I don't really read a lot of permaculture books because, I mean, I did my permaculture design certification out in San Francisco, and they're too limited. I like more, I wouldn't say limited, they focus on permaculture. And like I said, I think I would say Farmers for 40 Centuries is, I mean, if you're technically minded and like dense stuff and like history, that book is golden. John S.B. Brown, I think is his name, wrote a book called Just Enough, which again it's about Japanese, Edo period Japanese agroforestry, and how an island managed its natural resources when it basically had no external outputs for about 300 years. So I think that's I think islands are a great way to study how Earth, which is an island in space, should utilize its resources. And then another great one, which is a little bit more woo-woo-y, but I love it because it's like reading your grandma's book, is Carrots Love Tomatoes. And it's all about guild planting, which is, I think, key to the growing aspect of permaculture. And once you get into those things and you see how to correctly utilize your plants and the space around your plants, then permaculture, like I said, permaculture is just a set of obvious and natural and traditional heuristics that they systematize so that you are like, oh, okay, I can wrap my head around this. And then all sorts of things like swales and herb spirals and all this other stuff kind of grew up around it, which is permaculture, but it's kind of woo-woo. So, I think John S.B. Brown, let me, it's been years, let me, is that what it is? Asby Brown. I'm combining 2 different articles. But yeah, it's this. Lessons from Japan for Sustainable Living Architecture and Design. So it's, again, it showed how they utilized, Japanese gardening, space, and I think it works well with that Farmers for 40 Centuries by F.H. King. And then, I think we're about out. But, oh.
What projects are you currently working on in the theme of your talk?
What I'm currently trying to do is really I'm not going to put up my property because the satellite, this is going to go on YouTube, but I'm really trying to figure out FarmOS on my property because I just have, and hardwood propagation, woody perennials, and just trying to get as many trees clipped and propagated around my property in a way that makes sense, and getting that organized and automated in my own brain because I can't keep it all in my head. Anyways, I think that's it. Like I said, we have another Birds of a Feather on Sunday at 10. If you want to come and get more in on that. Sorry, I was going to look up that book. But if you want to get more information and have some fun and keep talking about this. But otherwise, I'm Keith Bowers. That was my talk. Yeah, that's one of those things where I think you just gotta